He never received the Medal of Honor. He never had a college degree. He was never the commandant of the Marine Corps, and yet his name still echoes louder than almost anyone else in Marine history.
Chesty Puller, the most famous Marine who never wore the nation's highest decoration. How does that happen? How does a man earn 5 Navy Crosses and a Distinguished Service Cross and still become something larger than medals? How does a young man with only a high school education claw his way to 3 stars as a lieutenant general? The answer begins long before the legends, before Korea, before Guadalcanal, back when he was just a stubborn boy in Virginia who refused to quit. Louis Burwell Chesty Puller was born on June 26, 1898, in West Point, Virginia. He was the third of 4 children in a family whose roots in America stretched back to 1621. He was even a distant cousin of General George S. Patton, but heritage did not guarantee greatness. In 1908, his father died, and the family's finances collapsed. At 10 years old, Puller was already working to help keep the household afloat. He sold crabs at the waterfront amusement park. He worked in a pulp mill. He stayed in merit school, but survival came first. War, however, was always on his mind. In 1916, he tried to enlist to join the punitive expedition against Pancho Villa. He was underage. His mother refused consent. When the United States entered World War I, he was only 17. Instead of the battlefield, he went to the Virginia Military Institute as a state cadet, receiving financial assistance in exchange for future service. By most accounts, he was an average student. Nothing about his grades suggested legend, but while he sat in classrooms, Europe was burning. During the summer ROTC camp in New York, Puller heard constant reports of the fighting overseas.
He read about the exploits of the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments. He followed the bloody headlines from Belleau Wood.
The Marines had carved their reputation in the forests of France, and Puller wanted in. He left VMY in August 1918 and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps as a private. He completed basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina. Because of his 2 years at VMI, his commander's recommendation, and strong test scores, he was selected for Officer Candidate School. At Quantico, Virginia, he pushed through the course and was commissioned a reserve second lieutenant on June 16, 1919. It should have been the beginning of a steady climb. Instead, it nearly ended his career. After the war, the Marine Corps was slashed in size. Officers were cut from 73,000 down to barely over 1,000. Just 10 days after receiving his commission, Puller was placed on inactive status and reduced in rank to corporal. Many men would have walked away. Puller did the opposite. On June 30, 1919, he re-enlisted as an enlisted Marine, wearing the stripes of a corporal without complaint. Pride meant nothing. Service meant everything. He was assigned to Haiti, where U.S. forces were involved in stabilizing the country under treaty obligations. There, Puller entered a different kind of war, jungle fighting against Kako insurgents. He served among a small cadre of American officers, largely Marines leading Haitian enlisted troops. In Haiti, he worked as an adjutant to Major Alexander Vandegrift, who would one day become Commandant of the Marine Corps. That connection mattered, but it was Puller's actions in the field that built his reputation. He was ordered to deliver supplies to the small towns of Miraguan and Las Cahobas, regions crawling with insurgents under the command of Benoit Battreville, a senior rebel leader. This was not parade ground soldiering. It was patrols through hostile terrain where ambush was constant and mercy was rare. During one mission, Puller led his force on a brutal 34-hour round-trip march to complete the deliveries and return to Port-au-Prince. Exhausted, operating in enemy territory, he began studying the insurgents, learning their patterns, their timing, their habits. Instead of waiting to be attacked, he chose to hunt. Puller organized night ambushes. He positioned a skirmish line forward, concealed 3 Lewis guns on the flank, and waited. When he located a rebel camp, he struck with precision. In a classic L-shaped ambush under cover of darkness, his men killed 17 insurgents. It was textbook execution, except there was no textbook. Puller was writing it. Over the course of more than 40 operations, leading platoon-sized elements, he refined aggressive night-fighting tactics that would define his style for the rest of his career. His forces killed over 200 insurgents and captured significant quantities of weapons. He led from the front, not from the rear. His Marines saw him in the mud, in the dark, under fire. That mattered. With the support of Major Vandegrift, Puller returned to the United States in March 1924 and successfully regained a regular commission as a second lieutenant. He was back in the officer corps, not because of connections, but because his record demanded it. Over the next several years, he rotated through assignments on the East Coast and at Pearl Harbor, sharpening his professional skills. Then, in December 1928, he received orders that would test him again: Nicaragua. There, serving with a detachment supporting the Nicaraguan National Guard, Puller spent 2 years fighting bandits and insurgents in brutal counterinsurgency operations. It was small unit warfare, fast, violent, personal. For his actions in mid-1930, he was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the Navy and Marine Corps. It was his first. It would not be his last. He returned home in 1931, completed the company officers course, and then went back to Nicaragua because for Puller, the war was never something to avoid. It was where he belonged. By 1932, Chesty Puller was no longer just another Marine officer grinding through obscure deployments. He had already fought more small wars than most men would see in a lifetime. He remained in Nicaragua until October 1932, and in a pitched battle against insurgents, he earned his second Navy Cross. 2 Navy Crosses before most officers even found their footing. Between Haiti and Nicaragua, Puller had accumulated more combat time than any other company-grade officer in the early 1930s. Not theory, not staff work, combat, jungle patrols, night engagements, real fighting. In 1933, Puller reported to the Marine Detachment at the American Legation in Beijing, China. It was a world away from Central American brush wars, but it carried its own tension. In China, he led the legendary Horse Marines, mounted troops who patrolled the volatile outskirts of the international settlements. It was old-world soldiering in a rapidly modernizing conflict zone. From there, he transferred to sea duty, aboard the cruiser USS Augusta, and there, fate quietly intervened. The Augusta's commanding officer was Captain Chester W. Nimitz, the same Nimitz who would one day command the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet. Puller did not know it yet, but relationships forged in quiet postings often matter when war comes. In 1936, Puller was assigned as an instructor at the basic school in Philadelphia. For 3 years, he taught infantry tactics to young officers. He was a combat veteran teaching men who had not yet heard a shot fired in anger. But even as he built future leaders, the institution reminded him of its rigid standards. Puller was denied admission to the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. The reason was simple and bureaucratic. He did not possess a bachelor's degree. Combat experience did not substitute for formal education. It was a slight, but Puller did not argue. He returned to sea duty aboard USS Augusta, then went ashore in 1940 with the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines in Shanghai. The Pacific was tightening. War was approaching. On November 13, 1937, Puller married Virginia Montague Evans, a woman he had first met 10 years earlier. Together, they would have 3 children, Virginia McCandless Puller, born in 1938, and twins Louis Burwell Puller Jr. and Martha Lee Puller, born in 1944. While Puller prepared for war, he was also building a family, though the coming years would rarely allow him to be home. In August 1941, Major Puller left China and took command of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines at Camp Lejeune. Just months later, on December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States was at war. Puller did not hesitate. He drilled his battalion relentlessly. He prepared them for the Pacific. The 1/7th sailed to defend Samoa, arriving in May 1942. Through the summer, they fortified the islands, trained, and waited. Then came the real test. They were ordered to join Major General Alexander Vandegrift's 1st Marine Division in the Solomon Islands. In September 1942, Puller's men came ashore on Guadalcanal. The campaign was already brutal. Supplies were scarce. The jungle was unforgiving. The Japanese were determined. Along the Battalica River, Puller's battalion went into action almost immediately, coming under intense enemy fire. In one critical moment, American forces were trapped near the river. Puller signaled the destroyer USS Monson to provide naval gunfire support, helping extract and rescue the endangered Marines. For his actions, he received the Bronze Star. But Guadalcanal was far from over. In late October 1942, the Japanese launched massive assaults to retake Henderson Field, the airstrip that controlled the island. If Henderson fell, the entire campaign might collapse. Puller's 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, alongside the Army's 3rd Battalion, 164th Infantry Regiment, held a critical sector of the perimeter. On the night of October 24th to 25th, the Japanese attacked in waves. For roughly 3 hours, the fighting was close, chaotic, and relentless. Puller's line bent, but did not break. The Marines and soldiers sustained around 70 casualties. The Japanese left more than 1,400 dead on the field. Henderson Field remained in American hands. For his leadership during the defense, Puller was awarded his 3rd Navy Cross. He was not commanding from a rear bunker. He was on the line, steady under pressure, directing fire, rallying men. On November 8, 1942, the Japanese struck again, this time hitting Puller's command post. He was wounded in the arm and leg. The injuries were serious enough to require surgery. Command of 1/7 temporarily passed to Major John E. Weber of 3/7. Even wounded, Puller's influence remained. One of his Marines, Staff Sergeant John Basilone, a former Army soldier serving in the Marine Corps, distinguished himself during the defense of Henderson Field. It was Puller who personally recommended Basilone for the Medal of Honor. Basilone would receive it, becoming one of the most celebrated Marines of the war. Puller left Guadalcanal with his reputation cemented. After the division secured the island, Lieutenant Colonel Puller was appointed executive officer of the 7th Marine Regiment. He had proven himself in the crucible of jungle warfare against a determined enemy. 3 Navy Crosses. Combat leadership under extreme pressure. And the war was only beginning. By late 1943, Chesty Puller was no longer simply a decorated officer. He was becoming a battlefield constant. Wherever the fighting was hardest, Puller seemed to appear. At Cape Gloucester on the western edge of New Britain, the rain fell without mercy, the mud swallowed men whole, and the Japanese were dug in deep. It was there, in the closing months of 1943 and into early 1944, that Puller led Marine units through dense jungle against fortified positions that refused to yield. He coordinated assaults under fire, pushed through terrain that destroyed formations, and kept his regimental elements moving when lesser commanders would have stalled. For his leadership and aggressive direction of the battle, he earned his 4th Navy Cross. 4. By that point, he was operating in territory reserved for legends. On February 1, 1944, Puller was promoted to full colonel. Soon after, he was given command of the 1st Marine Regiment. The next assignment would test everything he believed about offensive spirit and endurance. In September 1944, Puller and the 1st Marines were tasked with the assault on Peleliu. Their objective, seize Ummerbrugal Ridge, the jagged, fortified heart of the Japanese defensive network. It was the most difficult assignment on the island. The terrain was a maze of coral ridges, caves, interlocking fields of fire, and concealed artillery. The Japanese had transformed it into a fortress. Puller attacked. The fighting was savage, close, and unrelenting. The heat crushed men where they stood. Casualties mounted at a horrifying rate. The first Marines pressed forward anyway. When it was over, the objective had been taken, but at a terrible price. More than half of Puller's regiment became casualties. The losses triggered criticism. Some accused him of being too aggressive, too willing to push forward regardless of cost. Others argued the plan itself doomed the assault before it began. Puller was labeled by some as effective, but ruthless. Yet those who fought under him knew something different. He was always at the front. He shared the danger. He did not demand risks he would not take himself. That mattered in the calculus of war. Even before Peleliu, tragedy had struck close to home. In the summer of 1944, Puller's younger brother, Samuel D. Puller, executive officer of the 4th Marine Regiment, was killed by an enemy sniper on Guam. War was no longer an abstraction. It had reached his own bloodline. After Peleliu was secured, Puller returned to the United States in November 1944 to command the Infantry Training Regiment at Camp Lejeune. There he prepared new Marines for the final brutal chapters of the Pacific War. He remained in that role when World War II ended in 1945. For many officers, the end of the war meant a gradual fade into administrative command. Puller, however, remained a Marine's Marine. In the post-war years, he held a series of assignments, including command of the 8th Reserve District and the Marine Barracks at Pearl Harbor. Then, in 1950, war returned. Korea. Once again, Puller took command of the 1st Marine Regiment. Once again, he prepared his men for combat. In September 1950, he participated in General Douglas MacArthur's amphibious landing at Incheon, one of the boldest operations of the war. For his actions during the landings, Puller received the Silver Star and a 2nd Legion of Merit. But Korea would demand more than bold landings. It would demand survival against overwhelming odds. In late November 1950, as United Nations forces pushed deep into North Korea, Chinese Communist forces entered the war in massive numbers. At the Chosin Reservoir, Puller's regiment became part of one of the most desperate fighting withdrawals in American military history. From November 29th to December 4th, Puller displayed extraordinary leadership under encirclement and constant assault. For heroism during this period, he received the Distinguished Service Cross from the U.S. Army. Then, from December 5th through December 10th, as the battle intensified and temperatures plunged far below zero, Puller again distinguished himself. His regiment fought through waves of Chinese attacks, holding the line, protecting withdrawal routes, and maintaining cohesion in conditions that froze weapons and shattered morale. For his actions during those days, Puller earned his 5th Navy Cross. 5. No Marine before him had achieved that distinction. It was at Chosin that Puller delivered the line that would define his legend. "We've been looking for the enemy for some time now. We finally found him. We are surrounded." That simplifies things. It was not bravado, it was clarity. Surrounded meant the enemy was in every direction. It meant there was no rear to defend, only targets to engage. During the advance into North Korea and the brutal breakout from Chosin, Puller proved again that he thrived in the worst possible circumstances. He did not unravel when the situation deteriorated. He tightened control. He simplified the problem, fight forward. In January 1951, Puller was promoted to Brigadier General. He briefly served as Assistant Division Commander of the 1st Marine Division. The following month, after Major General Oliver P. Smith transferred, Puller temporarily assumed the command of the division. From jungle patrols in Haiti to frozen mountain combat in Korea, he had climbed from enlisted corporal back to commissioned officer, from lieutenant to general, through relentless combat leadership, not through academic credentials, not through polished staff assignments, through war. He remained in divisional command until returning to the United States in May, briefly leading the 3rd Marine Brigade at Camp Pendleton. When that formation was redesignated as the 3rd Marine Division in January 1952, Puller stayed with it, steady, seasoned, battle-tested. In September 1953, he was promoted to Major General. The following July, he assumed command of the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune. The young man, once denied advancement for lacking a college degree, was now commanding thousands. Decades of tropical deployments had taken their toll. Puller's body carried the price of service, high blood pressure, recurring malaria, and a rheumatic heart. The same environments where he forged his legend were slowly wearing him down. On November 1, 1955, after more than 3 decades in uniform, he was forced to retire. He left as one of the most decorated Marines in American history, 5 Navy Crosses, 1 Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Legions of Merit, a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart. The list reads like the record of an entire regiment, yet it belonged to one man. Puller himself claimed he never quite knew how he earned the nickname Chesty. Some said it was for his barrel chest, thrust forward like he was daring the world to challenge him. In Marine slang, Chesty also meant cocky. Perhaps it was both. What is certain is that he defied the conventional path to high command. No bachelor's degree, no polished academic credentials, yet through relentless combat leadership and an unshakable presence under fire, he rose to the highest ranks. He received a final promotion to lieutenant general on the retired list, a recognition that his career stood beyond ordinary measure. Puller retired to Virginia. After a series of strokes, he died on October 11, 1971. But the story did not end with him. His son, Louis B. Puller Jr., served as a platoon leader in Vietnam. He lost both legs and parts of both hands to a landmine. He earned the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. In 1992, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his autobiography, Fortunate Son, The Healing of a Vietnam Vet. In 1994, he took his own life. The weight of war does not always fade with time. The United States Navy later named the USS Louis B. Puller an expeditionary mobile base vessel in his honor. It is only the 2nd ship ever to bear his name. That fact alone speaks to the scale of his legacy. Chesty Puller was not myth. He was not propaganda. He was a Marine who fought in the jungles of Haiti, the hills of Nicaragua, the streets of China, the swamps of Guadalcanal, the ridges of Peleliu, and the frozen mountains of Korea. He rose from enlisted corporal to general, not because the system favored him, but because war kept proving him right. If this story mattered to you, if the legacy of warriors like Puller deserves to be remembered and examined without filters or myth, then stay with Battalica. Subscribe, support the channel, and be part of a community that digs into the hard edges of history, the battles, the decisions, and the men who shaped them.